And that transcript is what's very distracting. Okay. So it's 8:34, and we'll start with seeing if there's anyone from the public here to make any comments. Do we have anyone from the public? No. Okay. So we'll jump right into attendance. Ram.
Present.
Bob.
Here.
Present.
Patrick.
I'm here. Good morning.
Ajit. Lauren.
I'm here.
Jan.
Yep, I'm here.
Rachel.
Present.
Trina is unable to join us. Susan.
Present.
And Jen. And I see Ajit just joined us. Excellent. I know we have, good morning, and we have a number of guests with us this morning. I see that, Lori. Scott, I don't know if we want to do intros now or when we get to that part of the agenda.
I have a slide. We can do it just then in the agenda, although it's like the first thing.
Okay, cool. Do you want to share the slides?
Let me do that. I do want to share the slides.
Excellent. So the first item on the agenda is technical upgrades and peer learning. So we don't have to wait too long to meet everybody.
All right, let's do the introduction. So I'll maybe recap the rationale for these discussions in a second, but we had a wonderful group of people that volunteered for a series of peer learning sessions with similar types of systems or solutions to what we're have or looking to use for P20 Win, and that group is listed here. So I'll kind of recap these in a sec, but if folks want to introduce themselves, I think Maura, I didn't see Fred, Liam, and Sumit are the only ones who haven't already said hello to everybody.
I am Maura Preventure with CCIC.
Hi, this is Liam McGuckin. I'm with Connecticut Department of Labor, Office of Research.
Hi, this is Sumit Sojnani. I'm with the Office of Health Strategy.
Hi, Lori Colburn with the Department of Labor.
Oh, sorry, Lori. Thanks. I think that's everyone. So if there's someone who hasn't introduced yourself, I can't see the list of the participants any longer, but just pipe up and say so. Let me recap why we had volunteers briefly. So for Data Governing Board folks, this is part of a series of discussions that we've held over really at this point, really the last year, all through sort of voluntary contributions from different members of the board and sort of the state more broadly. We're bringing the discussion back to Data Governing Board today because this is the board whose purview is data governance, and all the questions about technology really pertain to this group's role and expertise. But we set up the meetings with some people that are on the Data Governing Board, some people that are not on the Data Governing Board, and we wanted to have a session to recap. So kind of more broadly, this is over the last year. So last year, starting in February, we had a technical upgrade planning process for P20 Win, which is kind of initiated by some of the activities that were in the original project plan for the SLDS grant. And so with the grantors, we said we want to sort of take a different approach to this. We want to take a holistic look at the technical infrastructure for the system, pull these activities together, and develop a planning process. And so that we take a step back now that we have new agencies, sort of a new framework for P20 Win, that we're taking a fresh perspective, bringing in some outside parties and looking holistically at the technology. And so we had a very wonderful group of people that met from sort of February to June, July of last year on planning for technical upgrades to P20 Win, which again had members of Data Governing Board, members of the Data Stewards Group, and some folks that are not directly part of P20 Win, including from State IT and from Office of Health Strategy, which you see among you here today. So we brought those sort of early conclusions from that planning process back to the Data Governing Board, I think in spring of last year, and then again more formally in June and July with a set of recommendations. We brought the recommendations to the Executive Board in August of last year, and had what I think was hopefully a good discussion about those then. And then we took 3 of the recommendations that we needed to do sort of further exploration on, and had folks sort of volunteer to participate in a set of peer learning conversations to further explore those 3 recommendations. And I'll pull those up in a second. But just again, sort of situating, this is part of a year-long process that has gone on in parallel to the time that folks are contributing to this group. They are contributing additional time to look at the technical infrastructure for P20 Win, and that we've brought sort of consistently, I think, tried to bring sort of preliminary and then final conclusions from that group back to this group, and then as needed, kind of up to the Executive Board. So this is, I think, capping the second phase of that process. The first phase was kind of the planning group internally, and the second phase is this peer learning to hear kind of what other similar jurisdictions are doing. And again, the group of people here contributed several hours of time to meetings, phone calls, recapping, probably reading materials and notes over the last several months from August to now, and we'll go through kind of what folks are focusing on. But I personally am very grateful to everybody that put time into this and thought about, you know, what we are doing and what we could learn from what others are doing. So the asks that we had, the framework for the peer learning discussions, and then hopefully in a second we can have a group discussion with the members of the group who participated in the peer learning discussions on what they learned from the process, and to talk with the Data Governing Board about kind of our collective thoughts about that, so that we can, you know, move forward and kind of identify what the possible next steps from that would be. But the framework we brought to the discussions was to focus on 3 recommendations from the memo that we drafted as part of the first phase of the planning process. Had 5 recommendations, 2 of which have been largely implemented, and then 3 that needed further exploration. And so we took those 3 recommendations and we sent them out to a variety of different parties based on recommendations from the SLDS technical assistance, from other kind of folks working in state or local data sharing efforts. And so we reached out to a bunch of other places and asked them for feedback and recommendations about their experience with these 3 recommendations from our memo, which are to look at options to reduce the movement of data, to increase security and improve the data request management process, to update the applications that we use for data transmittal, to improve our ability to get notifications and to sort of audit those systems, and to identify tools to streamline the data request process, which covers the data dictionaries, the metadata more generally, helping people navigate the process of developing requests and filling out the forms and the various agreements. So we sent the full memo and asked people to focus on these 3 when we talk with them. And the groups that we spoke with were similar types of state level systems, mostly kind of standard SLDS systems, but a couple that had you know, a different agency footprint. And we looked at Colorado, Iowa, Nevada, North Carolina, North Dakota, and Virginia, all of whom also contributed time and expertise to this, and we're grateful to them for that. And then we talked to a couple of different like platforms or tools that provided solutions that covered some of the pain points that we identified in the planning process on matching. We looked at privacy enhancing technology, tools for metadata management, data governance. And so that process, again, all the people on that list on the previous slide contributed several hours of time to going through a set of meetings to hear from other people about their thoughts on what we could do on these 3 recommendations. And we're, you know, hopefully be able to recap a little bit of those discussions today, and then identify, you know, what, if anything, we would want to do differently based on that learning process. I will click to the next slide, which is pulling out some themes and then 2 prompts for discussion at the bottom of the slides. But let me pause and see if anyone from the planning groups had anything they want to add about the discussions. Again, we'll express my gratitude for everybody putting a lot of time into this. This is not, it's all voluntary, and people brought suggestions, asked a lot of really good questions, and I think it was a very thoughtful process from the folks that were involved in it. And it's good to have different perspectives, and I think we, particularly for, I think Sumit and the OHS colleagues, and early on in the process from BITS, the state IT folks, they're not sort of directly required to be part of P21 in any fashion, and so really especially grateful for their time in this. Anything else from anyone just before we dip into kind of the discussion about it you want to highlight from the process itself? I can't see if people are raising hands, but all right, I'll just keep talking. So I'll go through a couple things, common themes, but this would be good to hear from the folks in that peer learning process. So we heard from a lot of different sites who did similar things in different ways than what we were doing. They all had a similar attempt that they're linking or matching or integrating data from different types of agencies to produce integrated data sets that can be used for applied research, analysis, evaluation, those kinds of things. And so they all did it in slightly different ways. I think common themes we saw across them with the terms federated, hybrid, centralized may mean something to us, but they mean very different things in different contexts to different people. So we talked to mostly sites that had federated or kind of hybrid solutions, and they all felt different from one another. Several of the sites we talked to had developed either one or both of these, usually in conjunction, linkage keys that had identifiers linked across different agency data sets, and then exposure data sets, sort of a standard data set that each agency produced that was the default that was used to fill requests. Some places had some method for hashing or anonymization of the data before it was matched. A few places had pretty interesting tools for managing the workflow for requests. And then somewhat less frequently, but I think it was helpful to hear how sites handled kind of almost but not quite data requests, where someone would request for something that was almost but not quite a part of an existing request. They'd want a different cut of the demographic data, they'd want a different time horizon, they'd want sort of a different crosstab than was part of the standard product. And so it was interesting to hear how places handled that. I think that's something that we're currently trying to contend with, how to handle those kinds of requests. And then a few places it set up some sort of secure enclave where the requesters could go and access the data through that rather than through sort of a file transfer, which is the method that we use. Let me truly stop talking. And then for the folks who were in the discussions, it would be great to hear from any of you about something that you learned from the calls, and then for the group to talk about what, if anything, we should consider changing for P21. Again, I thought they were interesting. We had a preliminary discussion about what folks learned from these. I'm sure I did not capture everything that was kind of a comment, or I know I didn't capture everything. There was a common theme from it in this one slide. So let me pause and either using the hand raising or just go on the mic for folks that were on the calls, something that you learned from them, so that we can kind of share it again with the data governing board, which is the group that really has the purview for making the setting the direction for data governance for this system.
Bob has his hand raised.
Yeah. So one of the things that there was one state in Scott, I can't remember which state it was, that had a central area for handling all the requests. So it was a group of, I don't know, 3 or 4 people that handled that request. And that does kind of check off a lot of things here, because they have authorization against the data, but it's a small group that does that. And you're putting in your expertise into one area. So in light of that, I did have a meeting with Dave Labadia, who is the director of agency business services. And he actually has created a data analytics and reporting unit but he said it would not to this degree. So he was interested in meeting with that state that, had a central area just to kind of see how they set it up, what skills they were looking for and stuff like that. But I think there are some benefits to centralizing this because I know data scientists, data analytics and stuff are in high demand. So I think we might be able to concentrate it and have economy of scale. So that was one takeaway I had.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else learn something? I know that some of you did because we talked about it earlier this week, and I will start calling on people unless someone unmutes or raises their hand. I know you have thoughts. No. All right, I'm going to request our colleagues from the Department of Labor, Liam, who does a lot of this work at the Department of Labor, matching, or Patrick. I don't know if the things that you learned from going through these you want to share back with the group. Again, they were not part of all of these calls. I doubt that folks will watch the 9 hours of recordings or read the notes. Liam or Patrick, if I can summon either of you to share something you learned from the process.
Sure. I'm trying to remember exactly what I said earlier this week. I apologize for that. Certainly one of my key takeaways was related to the methodologies that different organizations or different states were using, hinged a lot on their perspective of maintaining anonymity and data security more than anything else. Virginia is an example that comes to mind. Virginia creates a persistent join between all their organizations of all their data. That is, it's kept sequestered, but it's something we've pretty much from the beginning decided it was not the kind of thing we wanted to do. And it didn't, when we spoke to them, for example, they didn't seem they didn't seem to even consider the same kind of concerns that we had as a starting point for deciding to do that. So that was very interesting, and it kind of made me really rethink exactly what we need to do to maintain that anonymity and at what level we need to do it. So I don't think I expressed that the same way earlier this week, but I tried.
I don't know, Patrick, anything else from Department of Labor? Again, you guys are the data integration hub, so
Well, I mean, the one
changes.
thing that I learned, and I can't really, unfortunately, I'm having a hard time remembering how to actually link it up to exactly which state we were talking to. And I would need to go through all those many hours of tapes again. But it does seem that some other states are handling a lot more requests faster than we are. And, it is certainly a goal that I think we all have to try to be a little bit quicker in our turnaround. And so any little tips that we might have picked up on how to do that. Nothing really stood out to me though in terms of, oh, this state is doing it so much better than we are that we need to change. But I was a little bit, I don't want to say jealous, but I was intrigued by the fact that there were some states that seemed to be moving through a lot of requests more quickly than we are.
Still can't see the hand, so if someone has a hand raised, let me know. But I was going to ask either Jan Moore or Jen from Higher Ed. I know that when we did the original sort of recap on the recommendations for technical upgrades, sort of Higher Ed uniformly said we're concerned about any change to a hybrid approach. I do think we truly sort of explored different options in this discussion. I don't know if any one of you want to kind of reflect on anything you learned that either updates that point of view in any fashion. We're definitely not, pushing or obligating any transition of that kind. But I think we did a good, made a good faith effort to talk to some other states about how they approach different things in kind of a similar way. But I don't know from the higher ed sector, anyone wanted to voice, or Lauren, I know you're not on the calls, but for UConn or Ram from OHE.
I can share just maybe what's on my mind right now. I appreciate the invitation to that, Scott. So I hear what Bob and Liam and Patrick have said, and just for context, I guess, for other people. So of the states that we met with, most of them were not sort of the kind, they don't have the agency representation that we have here. I think Virginia was the only one that actually had a lot more than sort of just the standard education and workforce agencies, according to my notes. The other state, Nevada, actually only had 3 agencies participating in the collaboration they were talking about. And so maybe some of the speed may have been because in those particular circumstances, they were dealing with fewer agencies. I don't know. I'm certainly not suggesting at all that we have fewer agencies. I'm great. I'm glad everybody's here. I'm glad we're evolving in this way. It's fabulous. I think for me, how we link data is not about, okay, we just need to link it differently. It's about the business need. It's about what do we need to, is there something we need to achieve differently here in Connecticut? And if so, then what's the right technical solution for doing that? And then with that, what are we doing in terms of data security and the liability that comes with creating something that's centrally located? Those are the questions that come to mind. It wasn't really ever, these weren't things that we talked about, I think, with the other states. And then I would just say, while these states were great examples and they had a lot to offer in what we learned from them, there are also other models, other states that do more, I think, in terms of centralizing. I recall it was years ago, so they may have changed their model, but when I was first sort of learning about this myself, it was Utah. And I think there are other states that do this as well. They have a central repository, but it's in it, like you can't access it unless you go to a facility, and your outside researcher and their controls around what you can download, and kind of like the ADRF, if anybody's participated in the Coleridge Institute, it's very secure in that particular environment. And we haven't, so from my perspective, it's not about should it be federated or hybrid or centralized. It's more about what is the need? Do we need something different technically to do what we need to do? And if so, then what, it's sort of design follows function, right? And then paying a lot of attention to security, privacy, and liability. My 2 cents. I'm sorry, that might have been 4 cents.
No, thank you. I don't know. Jen, Maura, either of you? Also just calling on sectors. Higher ed.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add that hasn't already been said. Sort of echoing Patrick, like nothing jumped out at me as like, oh, they're doing this perfectly and this is the model we should follow. That term hybrid really does vary so much state to state, and there's no fits all roadmap, unfortunately. And I think like our system being customized to meet the specific needs of all the agency partners and like the, lack of a better term, culture of the state, it seems like most of them did that. They all had different ways of looking at things. So.
And I'm going to last but not least call on both Susan and Sumit as both. So for Susan, one of the new agencies, I don't think Fred is on the call, but he was very active in the meetings, and then Sumit from a non-participating agency, but sort of new to the system, and also both of you coming from kind of the health and human services world. Like anything that you saw or learned or were intrigued by in these, I'll second what Maura said. There wasn't anything that jumped out as like, this is exactly the one perfect way to do it, but.
I think for me, and I shared this when we met the other day, was just thinking about some of those kind of privacy enhancement pieces, some of the technology that potentially we could employ to support some of that. So I think very similar to what Jan was surfacing, I think that that's an important consideration. I mentioned the consent management, which seems to be part of a broader MyCT, piece of things. So not necessarily something that struck me per se, but I just kind of reifying the importance in looking at strategies to ensure that that piece is amplified. Given the breadth of agencies and the nature of the data that potentially could be integrated, I think some of that consideration really needs to be advanced for this work.
All right, and from my perspective, I'd give a couple different comments, maybe even piggybacking on what Robert said and what Jan said. I think I was also intrigued by the state that does have a consolidated group across agencies or educational systems, a small group that is able to focus and be experts in these different areas, knowledge of the data, the cross sections, having certain agreements in place on data sharing, understanding consent management. And that intrigued me, not because that is somehow a perfect model, right? So going back to the comment, Jan, that you made, that there should be a problem that we're finding a solution for. Those are not necessarily the words you use, but just paraphrasing. I agree with that, but sometimes I also find that I don't know what I don't know. So obviously, we're trying to connect the dots and really understand what data might exist and how it can be leveraged. And oftentimes, and maybe this is because I'm new, at least within the HHS agencies, I don't always know what are these siloed data systems that exist and what kind of data exists and what overlaps and what intersects. And if there was a group that had knowledge and expertise on that, doesn't always necessarily mean that we have to centralize the data, even though that could be an option. And I know when we were looking at one of the states, there is this centralized concept, but people being brought together does not always have to equal that data upfront is brought together, even though that could be a model. I didn't see anything that jumped out to say this is a perfect model that this other state is doing, and oh, we should immediately just jump to that, and somehow there is this nirvana state that exists. I think it was more to say what makes sense and are there incremental improvements that Connecticut could make. And part of my comments also come from a broader need that we're looking at within HHS agencies, at least, to connect systems, connect people, connect data. And I think the whole goal behind that is to say, how do we look at a person holistically? So sometimes by having that data knowledge or a small group of people that have tremendous data knowledge and understanding of what can be shared, what can't be shared, and how data can be used could be beneficial. So those would be some of my comments.
Thank you. And I know I missed a couple people that were in the group. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to bring up from the learning sessions. Again, I thought they were very helpful. I think the one discussion prompted maybe to now shift the burden of discussion to the members of the data governing board that were not part of those meetings and the ones who are part of the meetings, are to think about things that we could consider changing for P20 Win. The intention of going through this planning process was not to just, I guess it's enough to give us a reflection to say, is there something we should be doing differently? I don't anticipate that we would go through it and say everything is perfectly fine. We're going to do things exactly the same. I do think the one milestone that we set is what I think both Patrick and Jan cited in kind of different ways, is meeting the business needs of sort of the the state as a whole and the different stakeholders requesting data, particularly to be able to have kind of a faster turnaround for the request process. And all of the recommendations, I think, hopefully build towards that in kind of different pieces. But that was the milestone that we set, is to make the process, both more secure and more efficient at the same time, which is a tough balance to strike. But we're trying to do that because of the expansion to new agencies, kind of the increased demand and the need for being able to use data to inform policy and practice, which is the ultimate sort of mission that we have as a system. So I think that's kind of our end goal. We're trying to come up with pieces that would help with that. There is no one solution to that challenge. So bit by bit, I think we'll get some out of that. But for the other members of the data governing board, or the ones kind of who are on that, things that you based on the questions, the comments you've heard today, things we should consider changing for P20 when we do have some things I think that are flagged as possible next steps in the discussion. But what did you all hear? And we also have 9 hours of recordings if you want to watch them. So.
Scott, if you don't mind, I'll just jump in with mine.
I do not. Please, yeah. Go ahead.
I think workflow management, having, I know we're working towards the templates and DSAs and all that, I understand, but eventually to have some sort of workflow to help move that information. And on the back end, my request recently around the data destruction certificates. Thank you, Katie, for helping with those. A way to keep track of those dates for when things need to be destroyed and sort of handle that on a more automated fashion, because it's complicated. It's complicated just figuring out the right time zones with the right round of data and whatnot. I think those would be great improvements. Thanks.
Others? Anyone else? Things we should look at, focus on? We can give folks time to mull it over. I know we lost someone and had a couple people that can't make it today. On Jan's point, we're testing one specific next step I think we get from these is there was a couple states that had a pretty robust workflow management system, and one of them mentioned that they were going to make it open source at some point later this year. So I think that's something we're going to probably have as a good follow-up, is to see the tools they're using for that. And then in parallel to that, we're testing out a project management system that we can use to track the documents and the dates and, mark that this is data is destroyed, a year from now or something like that. So we're testing something out now with OPM and Department of Labor. Hopefully will work. And there's a pretty good example to follow up on from at least one state on that. Anything else? I'm going to look at the screen, and who didn't talk? We have Lindsay, Lauren, Ajit, Ram, Lori. Anything you heard that it seems worth looking at or following up on? Again, we have good leads with all these states. Nothing was perfect, but we can go and follow up and have further discussion with the states or different vendors. Kind of look at a solution that someone had out there. I didn't see a lot in the kind of technology space, but it was more about process.
I don't have any concerns at the moment.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific to add, but I'm really glad that we're collectively looking at this and revisiting it together, so that and I'm glad the folks who are looking at it are the ones who are looking at it. So I'm thrilled that we're looking at it. Whether we make changes or not, we can figure that out later. But I'm glad we're taking a look at it.
All right. I will, unless there's anything else, and I don't see anybody making a move to unmute, but please do so if you wish. So we'll follow up. I think there were two very concrete but easy to do things. We'll have, I think, a learning session with the folks from BITS, kind of about the just generally the new org chart there and some of the things that Bob talked about earlier. I do think having a separate, probably a learning session on consent management seems worth doing, and it's a little tricky to figure out kind of where that would, how to do that. But I think that's a rich topic that we did not have a ton of time to go into on the technical upgrade calls, but at some point will be it's relevant for lots of different things. So to my mind, those were two good things to just sort of follow up and dig into a little more through probably the learning sessions. And then we had some good follow-up conversations. I think, again, one of the states had a pretty good workflow management system. I think some of the things on the privacy enhancing technology, we had some leads on those beyond the one conversation we had as well. So if we'll send out links to the recordings and some of the materials to everybody in this group afterwards. So if you wanted to see, there's good, little things. One of the states had like a really nice set of guidelines for data security for the requesters. That's a document that we don't, have kind of like off the shelf. And so like there's some good examples on things that we could borrow or steal from as well that we got out of these that are not earth shattering, but helpful tools. So. Right.
Hey Scott, quick question. What's the software you're piloting, the project management software? What's the name of it?
Yeah, so we're using it's Jira and Confluence, which are like, yeah, and I'm happy to have a more in-depth offline discussion about the different options that we vetted, but
it's just curious.
Yeah, it's working okay, I would say. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Testing it. But open to other options. We've had some conversations and asked what other different types of project management tools have. It does not seem like there is a great single solution, but the one that a couple of states are using seemed promising, and it sounded like they would also have an open source version available in the future. TBD. All right, I'm going to stop talking. Finally.
All right, so next item on the agenda is the SLDS outcome map. So at our last meeting, we started talking about some big picture goals that we wanted to accomplish for P20 Win in year 3 of the grant. If you want to go to the next slide. So on the left-hand side, the year 2 outcomes we accomplished, and we're hoping that we can build on those and really expand what we can accomplish with P20 Win in year 3. So on the right-hand side are 3 ideas that came from the discussion, which is increased capacity for the system and participating agencies, standardizing onboarding for agencies, board members, and staff, and then establishing the resident advisory board and other community engagement efforts. Since that meeting, has anybody had any ideas for goals that we should identify working towards for this year? These are like big picture, radical, what we want to see P20 Win become. This, so we have to submit the year 3 outcomes at the end of this month. So we will share another draft with the group before we submit it to SLDS.
Katie, I don't have something to add to as an outcome, but just in relationship to the third bullet on the resident advisory board, I'm assuming you've seen the grant opportunity from AISP, the recent one that's focusing on. It had a community engagement focus, and if you haven't seen it, I'm assuming you have, but if you haven't, I can forward it to you. But it seemed like the type of thing that could be leveraged within our system.
I have probably missed it. It sounds familiar, but I'm happy for you to forward it to me. If you can.
Sure. It had a health slant to it, but I'm not speaking. But education and other factors are contributed to community and individual health. So there's a tie in there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Any thoughts? Maybe not necessarily ideas. Okay, well, please reach out if you want to have an online or offline conversation, or if you have any ideas, you can email me. Moving on, you want to go to the next slide. So on to updates. So we have our data request calendar. You want to go to the next slide. So these are the incoming and active data requests, from requests submitted to DSAs in progress to data matching in progress. So hopefully we will see some more activity in the next month. We do have a few data requests that could move forward, but we're still working on DSAs. Is there anything missing? Do any of you know of data requests that will be submitted? Okay. Next slide. So our next learning session is February 18th with the CT project. We have a couple of ideas for topics for future learning sessions that include the Children's Behavioral Health Plan, BITS, and Connie. And then just as a reminder, those are some past sessions that we've had. So we welcome any and all ideas for learning session topics. We really want to take this opportunity to really learn and discover what's out there and how we can use it to really build P20 win in the state.
Katie, do you want to briefly describe what the CT project is? I'm happy to. But...
You can.
Okay. This like I would say is like a preview for folks, but this is a project that is early on that reached out, and I know has spoken to a couple of folks individually, but they wanted to have a group discussion. I would characterize as like a project coming out of philanthropy to look kind of holistically at improving cradle to career outcomes for folks in Connecticut. And one of the things they wanted to do was understand the ways in which the state can provide data on that to help measure outcomes. And they are doing kind of a sprint to learn about different resources for data in the state. And so we offered up having a learning session in February, which hopefully will be engaging and interesting opportunity for both everyone in this group to learn about that project and for them to learn about the work that you do. We'll send out they have a one-pager that we can send out to folks after this, but it's an interesting opportunity to be kind of like in the close to the ground floor for something that appears to be like an interesting, probably longer term project in the state. And since Sumit is here, we're going to also ask if he can help with getting the HIE for a future session as well, which I think we had kind of an early one on health data infrastructure last year prior to Sumit's arrival. But understanding kind of the HIE now that we have a functioning HIE for the state is a good thing, I think, for folks to learn about.
Absolutely happy to do it. And that would give us a platform too, because we are trying to connect the HIE with state agencies, those that would be relevant. So, and plus when we look at the social determinants of risk from a health perspective, even non-state actors that might be providing some type of a community health benefit that could connect to it would be beneficial. So I think that would be a good idea.
All right.
Excellent, thank you. I think that is everything for our agenda. We'll be reaching out with, Patrick?
I just wanted to, I'm sure all the people that need to know already know, but this afternoon is the Workforce Development One-Stop Project Kickoff. This is the portal that they're going to try to develop for all of the workforce stuff. We're not really sure what it's going to mean, but it will be related or unrelated to the upcoming P20 Win data request from the Office of Workforce Strategies and the Governor's Workforce Council. So since this afternoon is the kickoff meeting, I really don't know anything other than that. I've been invited to a meeting, but it may at some point become something that is related to the work that P20 Win is doing. So I wish I had more to tell you, but I'm sure in the future I'll have a lot more to say.
Thank you. I'm sure we will have a lot more to talk about with that.
Katie, with your permission, can I add 2 more things too? Unless you're about to adjourn.
Please. No,
So,
please.
2 things. I forgot about these when we prepared the agenda, but I'm going to one update and one thank you. So one brief update is we did, as Connecticut, put in for a sub-award to a proposal for to the College Initiative for their data-driven challenge. So New Jersey is the primary applicant, and we are a sub-applicant to it. Connecticut as a state is in phase 2, which means what we would be doing are primarily participating in governance activities and meetings. And so if New Jersey is awarded, we would get a small award that would help with travel and staff time to participate in some meetings. So we are a peripheral but critical part of the proposal. I will send the proposal document out to folks after, but we said this is an initiative that there's enough support for. We don't know the nature of that, and it is really at this point just participating in the governance activities. It does not require us to use or contribute data in any fashion, but we are participating in learning and getting a small amount of support for that if they are awarded the proposal without any further revisions. So I'll send those if folks have questions. The other thing, and oh yeah, Ram is still here. We had a very helpful session for which I want to thank OHE and also CCIC for helping to find and identify this. We had a helpful session where Office of Higher Ed participated in a public information forum on student debt with the Higher Ed Committee last week and gave some of the time up to talk about P20 Win. So I'm grateful to Ram and Mark French from OHE for doing that. And also, Jen and Maura from CCIC because they had flagged the same opportunity. So just 5 minutes of remarks. We didn't get a lot of questions about it, but a good way to make sure that the work that P20 Win is doing is in front of, in this case, the Higher Ed Committee. We can send a link to it, or it's just verbal remarks. It wasn't slides or anything after it. But thanks to Ram and OHE for flagging that and kind of sharing the time on that. I appreciate it. And it's a good reminder to other folks, don't hesitate to make sure that all of the branches of government are aware of the work that we're doing. So, that's all. Thanks.
Any other thoughts or comments? This is the time. This is your opportunity. Okay, well, on that note, it looks like we're all set. So I hope everybody has a good weekend, despite how dreary it is. And I will be in touch soon.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good weekend.